Hello and welcome to Buckle Up. I'm Harry King and this is the Datsun Violet, or A10, or, well, quite a lot of other names that I'll put in the title for you. It's the follow-up to the famous Datsun 510, and I'm going to see if it's any good. Let's get going, shall we? So, let's start this review with a small history lesson. What is a Datsun? A Datsun is a Nissan, but built for export. There was a company in Japan called Dat, and there was also a company in Japan called Nissan that we all know about, and at some point they acquired Dat, who made very small cars, and their smallest car was called the Datsun, S-O-N, and Nissan decided to change that to the Datsun, S-U-N, as an homage to the Japanese flag, and also because Son means something bad in Japanese. So that's how they came up with the name Datsun, and then they decided when they wanted to export cars to foreign markets, they should use that name instead of Nissan for the export cars, because Nissan was quite well known for having been a major part of the Japanese industrial complex during the Second World War, and especially in America, some Nissan executives feared that that would leave a sour taste in the mouth of American buyers. So they elected to go with Datsun, and that way, if no one liked their cars, then the Datsun name was tarnished, but the Nissan name was fine, and maybe they could come back later. The good news is it worked. It worked really well. Everyone really liked Datsuns, and suddenly Nissan went, wait, why does everyone like Datsun so much? We want them to like Nissan. So then in the mid-80s, they decided that all the Datsuns should become Nissans so that everyone liked Nissan more. So this is actually one of the last Datsuns. This is a 1981, and in between 1982 and 1984, they transitioned away from the Datsun name to everything being called a Nissan. This in itself is a Datsun A10, because this is a Mexican car, though in England it was called the Violet as well as in Japan, but in Europe it was called the J something or other. J10, I think, or J60, maybe. Ultimately, style-wise, let's get into the styling of this thing. It's fairly plain, fairly simple. Most of the small commuter/economy cars looked pretty much the same in the 80s. This has 4 headlights. Some cars would only have had 2. Some cars would have had round ones. There's a very, very small Datsun badge there that just says D. I suspect that was part of the transition from Datsun to Nissan, as they minimised the Datsun branding. And the wiper spindles are exposed, which you don't get anymore, because if you get hit by this car and crack your head on that, it'll probably kill you. Well, that's enough about dangerous wiper spindles. Let's talk about the styling at the side, hopefully none of which will kill you. We'll start here. This is an indicator repeater. They're not usually here on English cars, just thought I'd point out. Here is the rear view mirror. There's just the one. It doesn't have wing mirrors, it has a wing mirror. And it's also quite far back. I'd like to have 2, but there isn't. Then moving down, there's these fake vents. You might think, oh no, fake vents. I hate those things. But these are here for a good reason, because on the other side of the car, this fake vent hides the fuel filler cap, which is quite stylish actually, to not have a cutout in the metal. Good work there. There's also some very lovely chrome door handles. And the world's smallest designation badge here. Again, I'm assuming this is the Datsun transitioning thing, so they want a very small badge. It's a Datsun, it says it's a Datsun 1600, which is, as far as I knew, was a different model, but maybe that means this is the 1.6. I don't know, because we asked the owner of the car what model this car was, and he said it's a 1981. And all of the literature for the car is in Spanish, which I can't read. So we're going to work on the basis this is the 1.6 model of the Violet. But maybe it isn't. Tell me. To the back. Okay, and lastly we're here at the back, where, again, rounding out this design, I think basically you can sum it up as extremely clean. There's not a lot going on here. I think it's very, very pretty, but there's barely any styling as we would know it today, slashes, cuts, whatever. There are, though, these quite groovy rear tail lights. They're kind of all bumpy. I like them. Otherwise, there's a number plate here, and there's also a sticker of the number plate there, that's a Mexican thing. I don't know why they do that, but they do. There's also a third brake light. You might not be able to see it from out there, but it's actually here on the rear parcel shelf. Very safe. 3-hole brake lights. And a rather lovely metal bumper as well, which should help if anyone rear ends you. Shall we take a look in the boot? Hops up by itself. How cool is that? So, fairly standard saloon car boot. I think this is, yeah, that's fully the outside of the car. So if you put something too heavy in here and it bashed about, it would dent the outside of your vehicle, because that seems to be the outside skin. So it's a nice large rectangular shape. Of course, downside of cars from this era is they haven't quite sussed out ideal loading lip levels, so you have to lift everything up and over and into the trunk. But it's a good size once it's in there, and the opening is quite nice and large. So, you know, nice and practical if you're considering buying a Nissan Violet from 1981. Ooh, practicality. Okay, so here we are in the back seats. As you can see, it's not a huge space back here, but cars were smaller in the past. There's actually a surprising amount of headroom. The headline is sagging here, so it looks like my head is against the ceiling, but it's not actually. You can sit all the way up straight. The seat's quite low. I don't know if you can tell, my knees are quite high. There's a lot of space between the seat squab and the bottom of my legs. And I can't really stretch my legs out to improve that because there's a seat in the way. But I can put my feet underneath the seat in front of me. In terms of backseat amenities for your passengers, there's a light. There's wind-up windows, and there's door locks. Exciting stuff. Right, let's talk through the interior. It's pretty much what you'd expect if you've driven cars in the 80s. But if you haven't, I'll take you through it briefly. There's a set of gauge clusters, no digital dials here. It's all analog, because digital things were only for Casio watches in the 80s. There's a speedo, a temp gauge, I assume it's a water temperature gauge, a fuel gauge, and then another gauge, but it's just lights. There's no actual dial, and it just has brake oil and CHG, and I presume they light up when there's a problem. But there's no tachometer, so you just kind of guess. You listen to the engine. There is a stereo here. It's got some big chunky buttons on it that I assume are the saved favourites, but it's proper. It's like a mechanical favourite saving thing. On the right is your tuning knob, and on the left is your volume knob, and that's it. 2 knobs and 5 buttons, and then you have your HVAC controls, which are 3 sliders. There's a hot and a cold. Pretty sure this car doesn't have air conditioning. Haven't seen any kind of air conditioning under the bonnet, and it's pretty hot in here, if you can't tell by my sweat. Down here's transmission tunnel. Nice big gear stick. It's almost like something from a truck. It's obscenely long. 4 speeds, 4 on the floor. Nice. Just like a Mustang from the 60s. And a proper handbrake. Ooh, again, massively long. These are kind of bigger and wandier than you'd expect in a saloon car, especially if you drive a manual these days. The shifters are about that long and right next to your hand. And then, yeah, this huge but very skinny steering wheel. Lovely horn buttons here. Do you want to hear how the horn sounds? Nice. Sounds nice. Indicators and windscreen washers. Then your hazard switch is through the middle of the steering wheel, which isn't so bad in this car because the steering wheel is quite big, so it's quite easy to reach through and hit that. There's also a button here that says Niles 16003 that doesn't do anything. That's a blank, but if anyone could tell me who Niles is, then write in the comments down below. Otherwise, you have sun visors that are only attached at one end. So they swing around quite easily, but they're quite flimsy. Your rear view mirror, which is too small, and your one wing mirror, which is also too small. So rearward visibility when you're driving facing forwards isn't great, but the glass house is so capacious that turning round you can see very clearly. There's not many blind spots as you usually get with an old-fashioned car. I think that's everything covered. The seats are just a little bit. There's a sort of a sideways going thing down here that lets me move it backwards and forwards, and there's a lever on the side for reclining, and that's it. No lumbar, integrated headrest. Again, quite standard for the 80s. Let's drive. Okay, so driving the Datsun A10 slash Violet slash everything else. Number one, I apologise, this is going to be quite a noisy experience. One, because the refinement's not great, the road's quite bumpy, but two, it's incredibly hot today, and if I turn the fan on, that will be even louder than this, weirdly, I promise. So the windows are open, which means the faster I go, the less you can hear me. In fact, it's so incredibly hot, it's actually quite unpleasant to touch the steering wheel for a long time, especially the top where it's been in the sun. So if you see me wincing at any point, it's probably me burning my hands on the steering wheel. Now, for a car that's 40 years old, I'm actually very impressed by both the clutch and the gear shift. Obviously, I have to review this car as I have it, so this isn't necessarily true of all of these cars, but in this one, the gear shift is surprisingly positive, and the clutch engages in a very linear and pleasant manner. The same can't be said for the other pedals, however. The throttle pedal is very, very short and very, very eager, so sometimes you go to put your foot down to realise that it's already all of the way down, and the brake pedal just has no feeling at all. There's some modicum of resistance to it, and you slow down, but there's not necessarily a connection between slowing down and the pedal itself. Because it's a 4-speed, it's very, very long geared. I'm yet to get it out of second gear. I might not even get into fourth, because we're going to mainly stick to residential streets. This is somebody else's cherished vintage vehicle. It's irreplaceable, and it won't even break 70 miles an hour, so I don't really plan on taking it on the highway. I also don't know if you've necessarily noticed, but you might have, there are quite a lot of speed bumps here. So I can talk about the ride and comfort, which is actually surprisingly good. Now, cabin comfort, seat support, seat cushion, not so great. I mean, it's an old cushy soft seat. It feels like sitting on a luxury camping chair rather than a sofa, but it's not terrible, especially for the vintage. And the suspension, and I suspect also the thick sidewalls on the tiny 14-inch wheels, really help with the ride. Third. Wow, we're in third. Out and speed bump. So here we go, here's one. Now, from ride to handling, obviously I've not been able to push this car to the limit, but the steering actually is pleasant and nicely direct. Yeah. It's also surprisingly well weighted, and I don't know if it's assisted or not. It's quite hard to find information on this vehicle, especially being the Mexican variant, because Nissan sold this car under so many names. The wide-ranging articles, Wikipedia, etc., either talk about an American or English variant, or all of them in loose terms, and anything specifically about this car is written in Spanish, which again, I can say enough to order my dinner. I can't say enough to read a car's manual. So, is that on? Oy. So I think because of the 1600 badges on the side, this has Datsun's 1.6 engine that they had previously put in the 510, although they did have another 1.6 engine, which was 2 brake horsepower less, but I think this one has 96 brake horsepower, or like I said, it could have 94, and it has 100 pound-feet of torque, probably, if it's the engine I think it is. It could be any number of engines though. I believe the displacements range from 1.3 to 2 litres, so take your pick. It's one of them. What it isn't is very powerful. The 96 or so brake horsepower as it used to have, I suspect quite a lot of escape the stable at this point. Throttle response is not peppy. It'll get up to speed, but it's not a fast car. Considering that, well, this is the other thing. Apparently, this model range can weigh anywhere between 800 kilograms and 1.3 tons. So it weighs one of those amounts. The performance would make sense if it was 1.3 tons because it's slower than my Ford Focus. Now that will be partly due to the gearing, but really you'd expect a car that's probably around the 1 ton mark with 100 horsepower to get a decent move on, really. It's quite a charming little thing to drive. The nice gear shift and the nice steering makes it pretty engaging, and I can live with a slightly ropey throttle and brake. It's an old car. They all have slightly ropey throttles and brakes. It's really, really unpleasant to reverse and not have a wing mirror on your right hand side in a left hand drive vehicle. It's because that's the bit of the car you already can't see well, and then there's no extra help, which is, yeah, it's not brilliant. What's slightly interesting is the pedal layout. It has a floor mounted accelerator like a BMW, which in theory makes it fantastic for heel and towing. Yeah, it is actually, but I'm not sure why. I believe the 510 in America was known as the poor man's BMW, and this sort of replaced it ish. So maybe they were going for that sort of thing. It's quite a nice pedal setup. They're spaced very well as well. It's just the fact that this one doesn't seem to have maybe all the finesse it should. I suspect the steering may be unassisted because it's not impossible to move when you're stationary. But it is really very well weighted once you're on the move, and quite communicative. I can feel quite a lot through the steering wheel despite its weird thinness and largeness. There's just something about old cars. I guess it's the fact that they're not new cars, they're different. It just makes them intrinsically more interesting and potentially more engaging because of it. Even though in theory the control surfaces and everything aren't as well tuned, they're somehow more tactile. Now if you read the owner's manual, it bizarrely gives you an exact readout of the miles per hour you can achieve in each gear, and it claims that fourth gear will take you all the way to a heady 110 kilometers an hour, which for us in England is 68. So it's not a car that would be comfortable on a modern motorway. But actually around urban streets, I'm quite enjoying driving it. The thing that's a shame is I don't have access to any kind of country B roads, not without going on the highway first, so I unfortunately won't be able to experience the handling dynamics to maybe their full extent. But I suspect the chassis is probably not amazing, especially by modern standards, but the fact that the tyres are so small and skinny means the grip gives up way before the chassis does. And there's not a lot of power to play with either. It does go to the rear wheels though, which is quite nice. This was the last Datsun Nissan job that did that in this segment. This was replaced by the Primera, which was front wheel drive. I think ultimately the driving experience in this vehicle is a dated one. You will be pleasantly surprised by a few things, but really everything else will be almost exactly as you expect, if not a little worse. But I would say if you get a chance, give it a go. It's got a lot of charm. And people talk about Japanese cars having no soul, which I think is just a gatekeeping way of claiming European cars are superior. And they're just not. This is a lovely little car. It's so cute and sweet. And it's like a little begging puppy. It's just lovely. Give it a go, give it a chance. Okay, let's give this a conclusion. So, what do I think of the Datsun Violet, or A10? It's a very good example of a car of its time. So, No, it doesn't hold up to modern cars, but it was never going to. It's from 1981. It's 40 years old. It's got 300,000 miles on the clock, and yet it still runs reliably and regularly, and the driving is fine. Yes, some things could be better, but some things are quite good, and really it's a classic you could use most days. So if you're looking for a classic car, but you want to be able to use it fairly regularly, maybe consider one of these. It'll almost certainly give you less grief than a British one. It's not even leaking any oil. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, everyone. Please remember to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you can keep seeing videos from us. We have all of our social media links in the description down below, as well as a link to our Patreon if you'd like to support us and give us money. And then we could do even more exciting things on this channel, which would be fun, wouldn't it? We also have merch if you'd like to support us that way. There's a link down there for that as well. And I guess all there is left to say is thank you. Please keep watching, keep subscribing, and we'll keep making videos. Cheerio!